Elias Monroe slammed the cabin door shut behind him, grateful for the silence and the isolation. No assistants, no investors, no reporters. Just pine trees, a lake, and the sound of his own breath for the next 2 weeks. It was exactly what he needed. He tossed his leather duffel onto the worn-out couch and let out a sigh. The place was rustic, but clean. A fireplace. A small kitchen. No self-service. Perfect. At 32, Elias had built and sold 3 companies. He was worth tens of millions and could afford a penthouse in Manhattan or a villa in Greece, but after his last relationship imploded under the weight of his net worth, he needed space. Real space. The kind where no one cared who he was. He pulled open the curtains to check the view and paused. There was another cabin next door. He hadn't noticed it in the listing. A smaller one, with smoke curling from the chimney and wind chimes dancing in the breeze. Not exactly secluded, but fine, he wasn't here to socialize. Still, his eyes lingered when the front door of the other cabin opened. A woman stepped out, balancing a basket on her hip. She wore a thick gray sweater and jeans tucked into boots. Her long dark hair was in a loose braid, and her face was flushed from the cold. She moved with purpose, walking down the porch steps and heading toward a line of clothes drying on a rope. She hadn't seen him. And he wasn't sure why he couldn't stop watching her. He turned away quickly, irritated at himself. He didn't come here to stare at some mountain girl. He came to disappear. But the next morning, she was there again. This time, he spotted her crouched by the lake, tossing breadcrumbs to a duck and laughing softly when one waddled too close. The sound floated over the water. Light, free. He went back inside and tried to read. Then tried to write. Then tried to sleep. By the 3rd day, the universe made the choice for him. He was chopping firewood when he heard a muffled shout coming from the trees. He looked up and frowned. Then the shout came again, closer now. Hey. Hello. Can you help? Elias dropped the axe and jogged toward the voice. She was kneeling by a twisted pile of branches, gripping her ankle, her face pale. My dog chased something, and I slipped, she said, trying to force a smile. I think it's sprained. Elias was already kneeling beside her. You shouldn't move. Let me carry you. She blinked. You don't have to. I'm not letting you limp through the woods alone. She hesitated, then nodded. He lifted her easily, cradling her against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, but solid. Warm. Her hand clutched his jacket, and her breath hitched once before she looked away. Name's Elias, he said. Nola, she replied. Nola West. He carried her back to her cabin, where a golden retriever barked anxiously at the door. Kingston, she said, nodding to the dog. He's harmless. Elias helped her to the couch and looked around. The place was small, cozy, filled with half-finished paintings and the scent of cinnamon. Easels and brushes lined the walls. A fireplace crackled nearby. You're an artist? He asked, gently setting her foot on a cushion. Trying to be, Nola said, wincing as she adjusted. Moved here from Chicago last year. Needed a fresh start. Elias raised an eyebrow. This is definitely fresh. She laughed, and the sound hit him in the chest again. He wrapped her ankle with the cloth she handed him, careful not to push too hard. You've done this before, she said. First company I ever started was outdoor gear. Spent a lot of time hiking. You don't look like a hiker now. He grinned. What do I look like? She tilted her head. Like someone hiding from something. That hit too close to home. He stood. You should elevate your leg and rest. I'll check in later. She watched him with curious eyes. Thanks, Elias. He nodded and shut the door behind him. The next day, he brought her firewood. And the day after that, he brought soup. By the 5th day, she was walking with crutches he'd bought on a supply run into town. I didn't ask you to do this, she said, leaning on them as he helped her onto the porch. I know. Why are you? He didn't answer right away. I think. I just like seeing you smile. She stared at him, surprised. And then she smiled. They had dinner that night, grilled trout Elias caught from the lake and vegetables Nola had roasted. They ate on her front porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. It's funny, she said. I thought I came here to be alone. Turns out, I just needed the right company. He looked at her, really looked at her. Me too. She turned her face toward him. What are you hiding from, Elias? He hesitated. Being wanted for the wrong reasons. She didn't push. Just nodded. You ever miss the city? He asked. Sometimes. But I'd rather be broke and happy than rich and miserable. He let out a soft laugh. You don't think it's possible to be both? Depends on the person. She looked at him, and for the first time, he wanted to tell someone the truth. He didn't. Not yet. That night, back in his own cabin, Elias stared at the ceiling. He'd come here to get away from everything. But somehow, Nola was making him want to stay. And he wasn't sure what scared him more, going back to being alone, or telling her who he really was. You'll scare the fish if you stomp like that. Nola's voice came from a moss-covered boulder near the lake's edge, where she sat with her crutches propped beside her. Elias paused mid-step on the wooden dock, glancing down at the water where his reflection distorted with each ripple. I wasn't stomping, he said, walking more softly now. I was approaching with confidence. She replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face as a breeze caught it. They can smell arrogance. He crouched near the edge of the dock and cast a line. You've got a lot of opinions for someone who's never caught a trout. I've painted one. That should count for something. He smiled quietly, eyes on the water. The air was cooler than the day before, and clouds were beginning to gather in the distance. The lake mirrored the sky, and the trees around them stood still, listening. You always paint? He asked without looking at her. Not always. Not when it feels forced. It's like trying to sing with someone else's voice. But when it comes naturally, it's the only time I feel like I'm saying something that matters. He nodded slowly. Must be nice. Knowing what you're meant for. You don't? He reeled in his line, bait untouched. I know what I'm good at. Doesn't mean I love it. So why not do something else? He exhaled, the line dropping again with a soft splash. Because when people expect you to succeed, you start confusing their expectations with your own. She was quiet for a moment, then reached down to scratch Kingston behind the ear. He'd curled up at her feet, tail thumping softly. You ever wish you were someone else? She asked. All the time, he said, watching the bobber drift. Someone simpler. Someone who doesn't have to think 10 steps ahead of everyone else just to survive. You don't seem that complicated. That's the point. They sat in silence for a while. The kind that didn't itch or press. Just existed. Eventually, she said, I sold one of my paintings last spring. He turned to look at her. First time someone paid me for something I created. I didn't know whether to cry or ask if they were sure. Do you still have it? No. It went to a couple in Vermont. They sent me a photo of it hanging over their fireplace. It looked right there. Like it belonged. That's a feeling I haven't had in a long time, Elias said quietly. They didn't speak after that. Not until the wind picked up, sending a sharp gust across the water, and she shivered. He stood and offered a hand. Come on. Let's get you inside before the storm hits. Inside her cabin, the windows rattled as rain began to drum against the panes. Elias lit the fire while Nola arranged her paints on a folded towel near the hearth. You're staying? She asked, glancing up. Unless I want to get soaked crossing 20 yards of mud. Which I don't. Fair enough. She sat on a cushion near the fire and dipped her brush into a jar of water. Her hand moved with quiet precision, color flowing onto canvas in soft, deliberate strokes. Elias settled on the rug opposite her, leaning back on his elbows. "What are you painting?" "You." He blinked. "Seriously?" "Not your face. Just the impression of you. The silence you carry." He didn't know how to respond to that. So he didn't. A log popped in the fireplace, sending sparks leaping up the stone chimney. Rain lashed harder outside, turning the windows to mirrors. "You ever been in love?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her, surprised. "No," he said after a moment. "Not really." She didn't comment. Just kept painting. "What about you?" "I was. Once." "What happened?" "He left," she said. "Said he needed to find himself. Turns out, what he found was a marketing executive in Atlanta." Elias winced. "Ouch." "Yeah." She rinsed her brush. "He said I was too much of a dreamer. That I didn't make enough sense." "You make perfect sense to me." She looked up from her canvas then, and something passed between them. Not a spark. Not a jolt. Something slower. Like the warmth of a fire reaching your skin after you've been standing in the cold too long. "You're hard to read," she said. "Good," he replied. "I've spent years building that." "You ever think you could let someone in again? Let them see the real you?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure I remember who that is." She set the brush down and leaned back against the couch cushion, studying him. "Well, you're welcome to figure it out here. As long as you don't mind being one of my paintings. Only if you don't give me a halo or wings." "Deal." They were quiet again, the fire crackling between them, the rain relentless outside. Later that night, when the storm was at its loudest and the power flickered out for a moment, she lit candles without panic. He helped her move the easel back from the hearth and rolled out an extra blanket from the linen chest. "You never asked what I do," he said, folding the blanket in half. "You never offered." He looked at her. "Why didn't you ask?" "Because you never looked like someone who wanted to talk about it." He nodded slowly, then stretched out on the floor beside the fire. "You're different, Nola." "So are you," she said softly. The candles flickered. The storm began to ease. And in the dim light, Elias realized something he hadn't dared think before. He didn't feel like hiding anymore. Elias woke before dawn, the fire long dead and the cabin wrapped in the hush that followed a storm. He eased himself up from the blanket on the floor, careful not to disturb the quiet, and looked over at Nola, still asleep on the couch. Her arm hung over the side, fingers barely brushing the rug. Candlelight had burned down to wax puddles, and the only sound was Kingston's steady breathing at her feet. He stood, stretched the stiffness from his back, and crossed to the window. Outside, mist curled over the lake like breath. The storm had passed, but the sky hadn't quite decided what kind of day it wanted to be. He didn't want to leave. He also knew he couldn't keep hiding. By the time Nola stirred, Elias had breakfast-ready toast, scrambled eggs, and coffee brewed over the fire using the old stovetop percolator she'd kept tucked behind a stack of sketchbooks. She blinked groggily and sat up with a yawn. "You made this?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I did," he said, handing her a mug. "Don't get used to it. I'm only good at 5 things in the kitchen, and this used all of them." She smiled around the rim of her cup. "I'm impressed. And grateful. I figured you'd appreciate a real breakfast after all the canned soup. Only if you admit that your trout was overcooked." He raised an eyebrow. "That was a rustic sear. You're just not ready for innovation." She laughed, and it was different this time, deeper, less careful. They ate on the couch, knees almost touching, the fire crackling again in the hearth. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, setting her empty plate down. He glanced at her. "You mean after we finish all the eggs?" I mean after this. The cabins. The quiet. The not telling each other everything. He exhaled through his nose. I do think about it. Too much, probably. So? So I don't know what comes next, Nola. That's the truth. She nodded slowly. Well, I do. I have to go into town this afternoon. He looked at her, surprised. Yeah? There's a gallery downtown that's been asking about my work. They want to see if I can commit to a showing. That's huge. Why didn't you say anything before? Because I wasn't ready. I didn't think I mattered enough for it to matter. His brow furrowed. Don't ever say that again. She shrugged, but her eyes didn't drop. I guess meeting you reminded me what it feels like to be seen. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Do you want to go alone? I was hoping you'd come. He nodded once. I'll drive. The town was about 30 minutes away, nestled between two ranges and lined with narrow streets and brick storefronts. Elias hadn't been farther than the general store since he arrived, but driving beside Nola, hearing her hum off-key to the radio, made the world outside the trees feel less like something to avoid. They parked near the gallery, and she limped slowly inside with Kingston trotting beside her. Elias stayed back at first, watching her talk to a woman in her 60s with silver hair and wide-frame glasses. They stood in front of a small wall of sample pieces, woodsy landscapes, abstract skies, a few portraits that felt like memories turned into color. After a few minutes, Nola waved him in. This is Elias, she said. He's the one who convinced me to stop second-guessing. The woman smiled. Ah, amuse. More like a fire poker, Nola replied. He says the uncomfortable things. It suits you, the woman said, extending her hand. I'm Delia. I've been curating for 30 years, and your friend here has something special. Elias nodded, unsure what to say. Delia turned back to Nola. I'd love to reserve a spot in our spring series. You'll need at least 12 pieces. Can you handle that? Nola's fingers tightened around her crutch. I can. You're officially on the calendar. Delia smiled again. Congratulations. They left with a folder of details and a list of deadlines, and Elias could tell Nola was buzzing beneath the calm she wore on the surface. Outside, she leaned against the truck with a slow breath. You did that, she said. No, he said, opening the passenger door for her. You did that. I just watched. Back at the cabin, they made dinner together this time. Nola chopped vegetables while Elias grilled chicken over a small charcoal pit out back. They ate on the porch, the sun setting low behind the trees, turning everything gold. She looked over at him after the last bite. I don't know your last name. He froze, barely perceptibly. Then he set his fork down. Monroe. She blinked. As in Monroe Technologies? He didn't speak. You're Elias Monroe. He nodded once. She stared at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked inside. He followed a beat later. Nola. You lied to me. I didn't lie. I didn't tell you. That's the same thing. No, it's not. I needed somewhere I could just be me for once. Not a walking bank account. Not a target. So you came here and let me think what? That you were just some quiet guy who knew how to tie a fishing knot. I never wanted to use you. I just didn't want to ruin what we had. She folded her arms. You think I wouldn't have wanted you if I knew? I don't know what to think anymore. She looked down, jaw tight. I asked you if you were hiding. You said yes. But you didn't trust me enough to tell me what from. He stepped forward. I trust you more than anyone. Then why did you wait until I had to ask? Silence stretched between them. I'm sorry, he said. She nodded slowly. I need space tonight. He nodded too. Okay. He left without another word, the door clicking softly behind him. Back in his cabin, Elias stood in the middle of the room, the silence suddenly heavier than it had ever been. He looked out the window across the short stretch of trees that separated them. For the first time since arriving, the light in Nola's cabin wasn't on. Elias stood on the dock, hands in the pockets of his jacket, staring at the gray water stretching before him. Wind swept across the lake, brushing the surface into ripples that scattered the early morning light. He hadn't slept. The coffee in his thermos had gone cold an hour ago, but he kept sipping it anyway. Behind him, the cabins remained silent. He hadn't seen movement from Nola since the night before, not even Kingston's usual patrol across the porch. The stillness pressed on him with a weight he hadn't known he could feel. He'd spent years surrounded by people who watched his every move for what they could gain. Board members. Journalists. Brokers. And yet somehow, the only person who made him feel seen had been the one who didn't ask for any of it. And now she was gone from him. Not physically, just emotionally. And for the first time in his life, Elias realized he didn't want to win her back with logic or strategy. He wanted to earn her heart with truth. By mid-morning, he knocked once on her door. It opened a few inches, and Nola stood behind it, her eyes tired but steady. "I'm leaving today," she said. His chest tightened. "I figured. I've got to meet with the gallery again. And I need to get back to my apartment in town." He nodded, swallowing the things he wanted to say too quickly. "Can I talk to you before you go?" She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. Inside, her paintings had been stacked neatly by the door. Kingston lay beside them, ears alert but relaxed. The cabin smelled faintly of turpentine and rosemary, an odd, comforting mix. Nola crossed her arms. "So? I came here because I was exhausted," Elias began. "Not just from the pressure. From the pretending. I didn't know who I was without the money, the titles, the constant motion. And then I met you." She looked down, silent. "You asked me once if I could let someone in again," he continued. "I didn't answer honestly. Because the truth is I didn't think I had anything left to give that wasn't damaged." She finally met his eyes. "Then why start something with me?" "Because with you, I didn't feel like I had to be anything except human. You didn't care about my last name. You never once asked what I owned. You just saw me." "I did," she said quietly. "And then I realized you hadn't offered me the same." "I know," he said. "That was my failure. But I want to change that. Not for show. For real." She didn't interrupt. He took a step closer. "I bought the cabin," he said. "Both of them." That caught her off guard. "What?" "Yesterday. I made some calls. I don't want to go back to New York. I want to build something different here. Something slower. Something real." "You bought both?" she asked, confused. "I figured you might want to keep yours. I don't know what's next for us, Nola. But I want to be close enough to find out." She stared at him, her brows drawn. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm in love with you." The silence afterward was louder than the storm had been. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he said softly. "But I'm asking anyway. Not as the guy with the money. As the man standing in front of you." She stepped toward him, her voice low. "You think love is enough?" "I think with the right person, it's everything." She studied his face for a long moment. Then her shoulders softened. "I didn't paint last night," she said. "First time in weeks." "Because of me?" "Because I didn't know what color to use for disappointment." He looked down. "But this morning," she added, "I woke up and realized something." "What?" "I'd rather figure out 1,000 colors of uncertainty with you than paint certainty alone." Elias looked up, hope flickering in his chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. And I don't forgive you yet." "Not completely." "I'll wait." She reached for his hand. Then let's take the first step. Elias closed his fingers around hers, warmth spreading through his chest like the fire she always kept burning in the hearth. Later that afternoon, as she loaded her paintings into the back of her truck, Elias helped without a word. When she climbed into the driver's seat, he leaned in through the open window. "I'll be here when you get back." She smiled. "Don't burn the cabin down." "I'll try." "No promises." He watched her drive away, the tires kicking up a soft trail of gravel. 3 weeks later, she returned. He'd cleaned the place up. Built a new dock. Planted wildflowers along the edge of the porch. And when she stepped out of the truck, he didn't wait. He walked straight to her, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her like the world had narrowed to this single stretch of earth. "I missed you," she said when they finally broke apart. "I don't plan on missing you again." That night, he led her down the path behind the cabins where small lanterns flickered between the trees, guiding them to a clearing overlooking the lake. A table had been set beneath a canopy of string lights. Candles. Champagne. A single velvet box resting beside her plate. She looked at him, stunned. "Elias." "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "Not yet. This isn't a proposal." She arched an eyebrow. "Not yet," he repeated. "This is a promise." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold chain with a single charm, a tiny easel, carved in soft curves and hung from a fine loop. "A reminder," he said, fastening it around her neck. "That I see you. And I'll never stop." She touched the charm, her fingers trembling. "I want to build a life with you, Nola. Not a performance. A real one. Messy. Loud. Beautiful. I want your paintings on every wall, your voice in every room." "And your name on mine," she teased softly. "Someday." She leaned in, brushing her lips against his. "Then let's make that someday ours." They danced beneath the lights, no music but the rhythm of their laughter and the wind rustling through the trees. And when the stars came out, they stayed in the clearing until dawn. Together. Unhidden. Unafraid. Exactly where they were always meant to be. Nola stood on the ladder beside the gallery's front window, steadying a framed canvas as she adjusted it into place. Her hair was pinned in a loose knot, paint still faintly smudged along her jawline. Below her, Delia arranged the last placard on the pedestal beside the entrance, "Nola West Stillness and Color." "Nudge it half an inch left," Delia called, peering at the angle from the sidewalk. Nola shifted the frame carefully. "Better?" "Perfect. That's the last one." As Nola climbed down, her boots hit the sidewalk with a soft thud. She turned toward the street, half expecting to see Elias leaning against his truck, waiting with that quiet steadiness he carried like armor. But he wasn't there. He had called early that morning, his voice low and tired, to tell her a board member had flown in unexpectedly and he had to meet them in the city. She had said she understood, and she had meant it. What they were building wasn't fragile anymore. It didn't need constant proof. But still, she had hoped. By 5, the gallery was filled with people. Soft music played from hidden speakers, wine glasses clinked, and the scent of fresh lilacs from the floral arrangements drifted through the room. Nola stood near the center, answering questions about technique, inspiration, and color theory with a grace she hadn't known she possessed until now. A man in a tailored charcoal suit approached, holding a glass of red wine. "Your piece, Dusk Between Pines, moved my wife to tears. She's in the back now composing herself." "I'm honored," Nola said, genuinely touched. "That painting came from a quiet place. I'm glad it reached her." As the man thanked her and moved on, Delia approached from the side. "You've already sold 8, she murmured. "And 3 commissions are pending." Nola blinked. "That's more than I dared hope for." Delia touched her arm. "You earned this. Every brushstroke." As the evening wore on, Nola found herself drifting outside onto the balcony that overlooked the square. The town was lit in soft amber tones, and the buzz of conversation inside faded beneath the hush of the night air. She leaned against the railing, letting herself breathe. "I missed the toast," a voice said behind her. She turned, startled, and then her heart surged. Elias stood in the doorway, his jacket unbuttoned, tie askew, eyes tired but locked on her. Rain clung to his coat, his hair slightly damp. He'd driven through the storm. "You said you couldn't make it," she said, stepping toward him. "I lied," he said, closing the distance. "But only because I wanted to see your face when you realized I was here." She rested her hands against his chest. "You didn't need to come. I needed to. This is your world. And I want to be in all of it, not just the quiet corners." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "My resignation." Her breath caught. "You're serious?" "I'm done playing a role I never asked for. I sold my shares. I'm walking away." Her fingers curled into his lapel. "What will you do?" "I don't know," he said. "But I've been thinking about turning that old boathouse near the lake into a studio. For both of us. Paint upstairs. Maybe I'll build furniture downstairs. Something with my hands." She stared at him, stunned into stillness. "I want a life with you, Nola. Not moments. Not borrowed weekends. A full, messy, beautiful life." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. He kissed them away, one by one. Inside, applause erupted as a bell rang to mark the closing hour of the exhibition. But on the balcony, the world had shrunk to two people and the space between their hearts. That night, they returned to the cabins not separately, but together. In the weeks that followed, the boathouse was gutted. Nola painted large, sweeping pieces with tall windows open to the lake breeze. Elias learned to sand oak with precision, the weight of each plank grounding him in something real. They hosted neighbors for dinners under string lights, and Kingston roamed between them, always watching. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the rafters, Elias walked into the studio with a small, square box in his palm. Nola turned from her canvas, smudging blue across her cheek as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," she teased, wiping her hands on a cloth. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a sapphire set in a band of brushed gold. "I don't want a wedding with press releases," he said. "I just want you. On a Tuesday morning. In this building. With paint on your face and my last name on your lips." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stepped into his arms, kissed him hard, and whispered yes. They married that spring, beneath the pine trees by the lake. No guests except Delia, a few neighbors, and the wind that carried the scent of lilacs through the clearing. Nola wore a dress she'd sewn herself, and Elias wore a tie she'd painted with watercolor swirls. She walked barefoot down the aisle of wildflowers. He held her hand like it was the first and last chance he'd ever have to touch wonder. They built a life that didn't need to be explained or defended. A life where love grew in the quiet moments, in the shared glances across the studio, in the way they reached for each other in the dark without hesitation. And when the gallery in the city called to ask Nola if she'd consider a solo show in Paris the following year, Elias simply turned to her on the porch and said, "Let's go." They did. Together. Always.